Hi. Here we're going to talk about consumer decision making. We're going to introduce the model we're going to use and also talk about the first step, which is need recognition. Hi. So the model framework is based upon problem solving. That's the analogy. The consumers, as they try to fulfill needs, are solving problems. Um, and this can include not only brands and products, services, but also alternative behaviors. And any model is useful because if you understand the model, it enables you to predict behavior. And then also, once you understand how the model works and you can predict behavior, then you can change the inputs, the parts that lead to the buying behavior, and ultimately change behavior, which obviously is very useful for any marketing manager. Just remember that any model is just a simplification of reality. It doesn't include every potential factor in every case. It just usually includes the main one, or the main ones that have the largest impact. So this is the basic model for how consumers make decisions. First of all, a need is stimulated, and so they recognize that. That's the green part, is the actual decision model. And there's some type of want or thing that they're trying to use to fulfill their needs. And then once they've recognized that need and it's strong enough, they'll go out and search for information. Step 2. After searching for information about potential solutions and not making a decision yet about which one's best, according to this model, this simple model, they'll then take the best potential solutions and evaluate them to figure out which one is the best. And then from there, they'll make a choice and then actually go out and purchase it. Right? And then you'll see the dotted arrow that leads to exchange. After they consume the product, they kind of weigh the costs and benefits, and they'll have a reaction to it, and they'll have some overall feeling about it. That comes out in post-choice evaluation, and normally that is something to do with satisfaction or cognitive dissonance. Before we move on to need recognition, there's a couple of factors that play a big role in how consumers make decisions. And the first one is involvement. So involvement, as we've learned before, is just a degree of how important something is, personal relevance. Involvement can range from extreme, something we're obsessed with, to something that we don't really care at all about. And it varies by person, and within anybody, it varies over different times. And usually associated with involvement is the notion of perceived risk. Something that's a risk means that there's a potentially different outcomes, often one good, often one negative, and we're not really sure about the probabilities of which outcome we're going to get. Now, just to kind of illustrate some forms of risk, imagine I was considering changing from Sprint to Sprint phone service from AT&T. So one risk might be, hey, am I going to get the kind of service that I'm used to with AT&T? Performance risk. A second one might be related to safety. If my wife has Sprint and we have the service and she's in a place where she's uncomfortable, will she be able to get through to get the help she needs, whether it's to call the police, or me for help, or for a ride? There's also financial risk. The money that I spend on the service, buying a new phone because my phone's not compatible, if that doesn't work out, it's a lot of money. I've spent some money, so I might be afraid of the financial risk. Think of that, especially with very expensive purchases or purchases that involve a long contract. And the last one is social risk. Social risk is, hey, will my friends make fun of me when they find out I'm on Sprint and I was too cheap to pay AT&T or Verizon? So usually the greater the perceived risk, the greater the involvement we have. There are usually two types of involvement. Some people will have more, but they really fit into two categories. The first type of involvement is situational involvement. It just means at a certain point in time, your involvement may be high, and at another point towards some product, brand, behavior, service, it's going to be low. All right? And so an example of that might be, hey, you have a washing machine and it breaks. All right? Before that, we weren't very involved, didn't really care that much about your washing machine. But after it breaks, all of a sudden, there's some problems. You become highly involved. One, replacing it is relatively expensive. Two, you need clean clothes. How are you going to get clean clothes for work and for play? And then going to the laundromat, that's one way. It's a lot of effort. Going to dry cleaners and everything is slow and expensive. So the process until you get that washing machine installed and can do your own laundry again, you'll have relatively high involvement. Once the washing machine is working and everything's back to normal, your involvement will sink to a rather low level. Now, enduring involvement is the opposite. It means that we have relatively high involvement for something, whether it's a type of brand or products, an activity, a behavior, regardless of the situation. It's the things that are important to us. It's what people are into. It's our lifestyle. Maybe, I have one son, he's into cars. And another son who's really into sports. Other people are into health and fitness and fashion or getting the best deal they can. Enduring involvement means that we pay attention to these things, regardless of when we see them, because they're important to us. It's not based on some situation, and it's not temporary. The first step in the model is need or opportunity recognition. All right? Before the consumer is going to do something, buy something, behave in some way, they have to have a reason. We use the term opportunity to represent that not every situation is the consumer trying to fix something that's wrong or replace something that's been depleted. Sometimes we might drive by a store and see there's a big sale and decide to go in because we might find something that we would like. That would be an opportunity. All right, so anyway, all right, for there to be action, a need must be stimulated. All right, remember, need is a strong feeling that something is missing. All right, and when a person feels that need, it usually leads them to act. It gives them drive. Right? The big question in this area is, how do we know we have a need? All right? So basically how we kind of phrase it or think about it is, hey, we have two perceptions about ourselves. We have an actual state, our perception of where we're at any point in time or situation. And then we have some idea of our desired state, where we want to be, what we wish we were, or how the situation was. And when we feel, okay, there's a significantly big discrepancy between our desired state and our actual state, we're likely to act. We feel that. We go, oh, I wish I had one of those. Or boy, I could have one of those. That would be great. So that's what gives us drive. So marketing starts with this need recognition, this comparison, a pinch, okay, to the consumer that to get them started in their pursuit of finding that product or that brand that helps them get to that desired state. So there are basically two ways to create a problem or an opportunity. Raise a desired state. Make the desired state even higher so the person feels like, gee, I wish I was up there. The second way is to lower the actual state. Make the consumer feel he's not doing as well as he thought or he or she thought they were. Doing that can be effective, but you have to be careful because consumers, individuals will often deny that they're struggling or their actual position is worse than they perceived it to be. And two, sometimes people get upset. And when they get upset, they shoot the messenger. They may go buy a brand, but it's not going to be your brand. It's not going to be from your company. So, now, if the desired state and actual state for the consumer, or if their perception is that it's the same, there's no problem. There's no reason for anybody to change their behavior. They're relatively happy with what they want. And even if the desired state and the actual state are both low, there's still no reason for somebody to change their behavior. They're just not very happy. They're not very good at something, and they'll never be any good at it. So those things are the same. So you also have to be careful if the gap between the desired state and the actual state is too large. If a person feels like they can never own a Mercedes or a BMW or buy a house, then they're not going to try. They're not going to investigate it. The need isn't going to be stimulated. And therefore, there'll be no change in behavior and there'll be no chance for them to purchase your brand. The self-concept is a useful idea in thinking about need recognition. The self-concept is kind of what it sounds like. One definition is the totality of the individual's thoughts and feelings having reference to himself as an object. It's what we think of ourselves, our self-schema, if we were talking about how our knowledge is organized. It's our beliefs, our attitudes, our feelings, our knowledge about ourselves. Oftentimes it's measured by asking people to fill out a question that says, I am, and they fill out the blanks. Normally we can think of four components. The actual self is what we think of who we are. All right? Usually it's about our personality and traits. Our ideal self, who we wish we were, which includes our values and goals. Our social self, how we're viewed by others. And an important idea that if you watch the Khan video, that's also online, is our social identity and our membership in different types of social groups and the different roles we play. And lastly, there's the ideal social self, how we wish to be viewed by others. And especially the social identity, but all of the different selves, they're important to us because as we compare and see how we're doing compared to our actual self or our social self, or how we think others view us, or our ideal self, that is how we derive self-esteem. Congruity theory, right, has been used to try to link brand purchases with self-concept. And there are two main thoughts behind congruity theory. The first is that people are motivated to buy brands that enhance their self-image and self-esteem. And that they prefer brands that have personalities, human traits we assign to the brands, that are similar to theirs or boost their self-image. So if I think I'm a rugged, tough guy, all right, because I coach football, then I would probably buy a car that also had the personality of being rough and tough. Maybe a Jeep. Maybe I'd buy a truck. The other interesting part is that consumers are motivated to purchase brands that are consistent or maintain a consistency between their self-concept and self-image and the brand. So it means if I have a positive self-image, I'm going to buy brands that reflect a similar self-image. And if I have a negative self-image, I'm more likely to buy a brand that has negative personality traits. Even though that sounds like it doesn't make a lot of sense, we look to maintain consistency above a lot of other things. Most studies have looked at the different types of congruity between a person's self-concept and the type of brands they buy. And they found certain ones have strong relationships. The strongest relationships is when there's positive self-congruity. That is, that both the person's self-concept and the brand's personality are both similar and strong. The second most is called positive self-incongruity, right? And that is when there's a comparison between a positive product image and a negative self-image belief. In other words, this occurs when maybe I don't feel like I have a lot of status with my peers, but owning a BMW shows a lot of status. Therefore, I'm more likely to buy a BMW because it helps boost my self-concept with some personality or traits that I want, but I currently don't have. Negative self-congruity doesn't have nearly as strong a relationship, but it basically says that, hey, sometimes consumers with negative self-concept or traits or personalities often will purchase brands that have the similar type of traits or personality. And you can think about that is, for example, if I feel like I'm very thrifty and cheap, which really isn't a positive trait, I'm more likely to buy a brand that is inexpensive and cheap, right, than buy a brand that is really high quality and expensive. The last one is negative self-incongruity, and it has almost no relationship because it doesn't make a lot of sense for marketing. It's a comparison between a negative product image perception, a cheap brand, and a positive self-image belief, like I prefer things of high taste and quality. So rarely would we ever purchase things that would be so inconsistent with how we feel. So what's the moral of the story? Well, the first thing is to be sure to develop brands that have personalities that fit the target market. Second, focus on comparisons, ideal state, desired state, that utilize positive self-congruency, where the person's self-concept matches the brand personality, or positive self-incongruency, where a positive brand personality is able to help uplift somebody with a slightly negative view of themselves on those similar traits. In doing positive self-incongruency, you have to be careful, I think. The third point is not to spoil or contaminate, an established target market by inviting a different group of people, whether it's socioeconomic status or whatever, into an already established personality group. So example might be something where you have products that are only purchased by people with a lot of money, are considered to be very sophisticated or upscale, and then you're using the same brand name, you make lesser versions available to people at a different level. That might turn off the people in your main target market. In that case, you might be better off changing your brand name. And then the last point is negative self-incongruity can be used when you're looking at your competitors. So you might be able to show how purchasing a competitive brand, the brand has poor personality traits, negative personality traits, that don't match your target market's positive self. That might be a way to help put down your competition and boost your brand at the same time. Lastly, here's a collection of ads, mostly television ads, but a couple of print ads, where companies use different types of comparisons in terms of whether it represents perhaps an ideal self, an actual self, a social self, etc. And I think if you look at the different ads, you might be able to pick out which ones, in my opinion, represent which types of comparisons.